I'm really delighted to introduce Ruby today. I've taken 2 workshops with her about color, and I was trying to think of a really comprehensive word that would describe Ruby and her color theory. And the one that I came up with was alchemist, because she really makes magic with color. So please join me in welcoming Ruby Leslie.
Thank you. So I guess I have no idea what I look like on screen, and you get, the audience here gets this. It's a long lecture. There's,
Before we
yeah,
start,
sure.
I want to make sure, is the volume for everyone in the back?
Is that okay? Can you hear me? Do you want?
That mic's not picking up anything.
Okay, so does it need to come forward? Which mic? So I'm a New Yorker by birth and now a Vermonter by habitation. I can still speak fast and loud if it's necessary with my New York accent that remains despite my Vermont years. It's going on, I think, 40. So, okay, so has it worked yet?
Jeff, you're saying that both
All right.
mics are off?
Oh, sorry, I can drink something, and if you can hear me glugging, you know it's working.
Okay.
Do I need to face into anything? Okay.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Test, 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 test. Test, 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 test.
So if I
test,
speak,
test.
if I speak this loud, do you hear me in the back? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I'll try. That's my natural volume. I'm always being told to be quiet, but it's okay. Okay, so just as a start, it's a long presentation because I always feel like when I get paid to lecture that you deserve like my entire brain and you can fall asleep at any point that you would wish to. I'm usually not too boring, but sometimes there are fun things happening. You got to read what's on the screen. And I will be going through some color theory that is basic. And I guess I'm going to start. Okay, so here's a quick intro about me. And I actually think that this picture might have been taken at MAFA when I taught the 3Ds of 3D class. I live in a purple house in northern Vermont, almost at the Canadian border. My husband, Ken, is an artist, and after 38 years of teaching art at Northern Vermont University, retired 3 years ago. He designs and knits a sweater for himself every 2 years or so. He uses my yarn and wears my scarves. You'd think that life in Vermont is cold enough, but he spent a lot of time in Arctic countries doing artwork. This is an example of his donut-shaped, accordion-folded, Taurus artist book paintings, where he explores concepts of space and time during both summer and winter solstices. This image was painted in Umanak, Greenland, and I'll mention Greenland much later. And when he's back in Vermont, he works in a studio painted in his own image. When my kids were little, we used to tell them that Daddy was a pirate and that Mom made him quit the pirates because of his gold tooth. We have 3 adult children who have successfully fledged, but sadly, our pets have aged out. I especially miss our cat Zappa, my quality control guy, who kept the tangles under his firm grasp. Fortunately for me, a new generation of quality controllers has come along, and this is my granddaughter, Ursula, when she was 9 months old. Now she's 4.5. I discovered weaving in 1987 when I signed up for a weaving class at my local yarn store. I had no idea what weaving was, except that it was a fiber art, and I liked yarn. But I cried the first day of class because I thought I had wasted my money. I had 2 toddlers at home, this 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. I had no time, no money, and no space for what turns out to be a time-consuming, costly, equipment-demanding hobby. And then I immediately fell in love when I threw my first shuttle. Within 2 months of that class, I bought the 8-shaft Harrisville loom that I still weave on to this day, and my kids learned to nap. Well, I began my lifelong joy of sampling, which is actually just another word for designing. It is not a dirty word. I joined the local Weavers Guild and became a compulsive workshop attendee, which is why I'm so opinionated about what makes a good workshop and why I eventually started to teach. So that's the background. What I found over the last 38 years is that there's a lot of free-floating anxiety in Weaverland when it comes to using color, as though you have to be an artist in order to use color well. When weavers look for programs about color, inevitably, many think they have to take a class about color theory, which is a huge and daunting undertaking. But learning terminology is not the equivalent of learning how to design cloth and use color well. My premise is that you don't need to master color theory to use color masterfully. But of course, you do need some terminology in order to have a dialogue about color, which I will give you shortly. However, I won't be going into depth about color theory because from my perspective as a weaver, I only need enough information so I can successfully work with the limited range of colors that are available in off-the-shelf commercial yarn. It's a practical, pragmatic approach. It's perfect for non-professional weavers. And I think you could say that it has clearly worked well for me. What I'm going to do now is give you some terminology and to approach the subject of color from 2 directions. First, I'll talk about the nuts and bolts of color from a weaver's perspective, not as a painter nor as a dyer. And I'll talk about how the interlacement of yarn can make color sing. And for the second part, oops, okay, I guess I can't scroll down very easily. Let's see how I do this. Where's my mouse? Oh, well, here it goes. No, it's not doing that. Okay, every now and then I'll just have to wing it. And for the second part, I'll talk about process, how I figured out how to use color, which is a very gradual process with lots of exploration. It turns out that I love to sample because it's weaving without worrying about end results or perfection. Sampling to me is a scientific method where you set up hypotheses, testing only 1 or 2 variables at a time. And in that way, I can figure out why things do or don't work. And essentially, this process has helped me understand color theory without officially studying it. And in turn, I actually do use color theory ideas to enhance my work, and I'm going to share how you can do it also. In a nutshell, my environment influences my color choices, although it's not usually a conscious decision. But when I work with color, as I've said before, it's from a weaving-centric perspective, which is different than a painter's, dyer's, knitter's, or crocheter's perspective, because weaving is about pixelation of interlacing intersections of yarn bits. It's about optical blending and the optical effect of neighboring colors. In the art world, this is pointillism. It's about value, how light or dark something is, and it's about woven structure, which is the actual interlacement of 2 elements of yarn, warp and weft, and where you place your colors. No matter how many beautiful yarns you have on hand or lust to acquire, no matter how perfectly you match the colors of a still life or a painting or a poster so you can weave a fabric that matches, you will not succeed if you don't spend time understanding your weave structure and what it tells you about where to place color and how colors affect each other. And for the record, I don't believe in the old dichotomy that you're either a color or a structure person. You need both components working together to make masterful cloth.
Yeah.
Make sure I know where I am. Okay. One of my earliest guild experiences was a class on color where we were told to bring the thrums, the waste yarn from projects, any old yarn we had lying around, and then place them in the correct location on a large color wheel. So on this color wheel, where do you put pink, olive, lavender, brown, and gray? And then we went over 6 pages of definitions, terminology, and relationships, followed by being told to do some yarn wrappings using that random, incomplete selection of yarns that people had brought in to illustrate some of the relationships we supposedly had learned. But I had so many questions before I even began. How many ends of each color do you use to create a sequence? Is it just random? If you do a pattern, do you repeat it over and over, or you do a mirror image? And ultimately, how do you turn a yarn wrapping into a weaving? But he did that exercise, and these are my very first wrappings that day. And when I got home and showed these wrappings to Ken, I told him how overwhelmed and confused I had become with all of these color theory concepts. And I was really fortunate because he succeeded in clarifying things for me for the moment. But he was still not able to tell me how to implement color theory concepts in my weaving. Although he did complain about my use of Scotch tape and masking tape to hold the yarn in place. And as you can see, he's right, because of course, they're clearly not archival. Over the years, bit by bit, I played with yarn wrappings and how to apply color theory ideas in my weaving. And I was always grateful that I had my own personal art professor to help me work through my confusions. And I came to realize that a yarn wrapping is a starting off place. It's not necessarily a roadmap with a final destination. In order to go from a possible color palette, and this is the color palette for the 50 ways to weave your color workshop that I teach, to go to the yarns that represent it, to woven fabric, you need to know your weave structure. What are the threads doing? Where are the floats? What is the pattern unit? And you need to know this in order to set up your color order sequence, whether it's a drawdown or a yarn wrapping, so you can wind up with woven fabrics. And in this case, a draft for kitchen towels that Webb's invited me to design with yarns that they no longer stock, but they still sell the draft. Despite my failed attempt at fame and fortune, my kids all ended up with pretty nice set of towels as holiday gifts. And I'll talk about this fabric later again. It's called Bumbarette. 1 second. I'm now going to talk a bit about color theory, starting with the color wheel. This is a screenshot of Googling color wheel. And as you can see, there are many versions of it because there is no one color wheel. There are many. A color wheel is a representation of the rainbow, which is a physical manifestation based on the frequency of light. And I don't know if you know that rainbows are actually full circles. On the ground, we only see an arc or semicircle because the other half is cut off by the horizon. When talking about color wheels, there are differences based on whether you're working with light or pigment. And for the most part, I'll be talking about pigment-based color wheels because that's what yarn is made of. Here are a few color wheels using dye. On the left is a wheel with cotton fabric. On the right is a wheel with wool yarn. And although the chemical compositions of the dyes are different, the dye colors in both were set up to start and end with the same hues for each fiber. But the wheel can be set up starting with a different set of chemical formulations to produce a different sequence, which you see here on the right, which is, again, wool yarns, but they were dyed by starting with a different chemical composition than the wool yarns in the middle. Here's another color wheel, this time dealing with light. This is called Polychromatic Attention by the Icelandic artist Ólafur Eliasson. It's a ring of 24 crystal glass spheres mounted on a wall, forming a complete rainbow. Each sphere represents a step relative to its neighbor in a progression through the full spectrum of visible light. And it's a really, really graceful stepping in and out of the yellows, which was not seen in the previous color circles, where the transitions are not nearly as smooth, especially in the yellow to orange areas and the yellow to green areas. And if you haven't already experienced this phenomena, yellow tends to be a difficult color to blend gradually and can often be a diva. Here's a one-woman British rainbow and a multi-woman American one. For years in my weaving world, no one ever seemed to mention the concept of value as being important. But the concept of value is really important. This is the gray scale or value scale, how light or dark a color is. And physically, our eyes have photoreceptors in the retina, which respond to light. Cones see color, but only work in bright light. Rods don't see color, and there are more of them than cones. They're more sensitive to light and dark changes of shape and movement. It's evolutionarily advantageous to be able to see and discriminate objects at night, especially, well, both for prey and for predator, when we can't distinguish color. And I don't know if you've ever experienced trying to find someone's house in the dark when they've only given you the directions saying what color their house is, and no idea. Okay, let me just, I can't go down for some reason to make sure I've gotten everything on my presenter notes. Okay. Here's how to use the value scale. Each value band on the card has a hole in it. You find the relative lightness or darkness of a color by placing the value scale over something and looking through the holes. You squint through almost closed eyes until the hole disappears and merges with the band of gray. And this locates the relative lightness or darkness of a color. So against white paper, the first hole is usually where the background and the band merge. Against black or dark paper, the hole will disappear at the bottom of the gray scale, or should disappear there. And of course, since color has value, here the gray scale is used to find the value of the pink paper. Squint your eyes, and it looks like the hole disappears at number 2 on the left, or maybe number 3 on the right. All right. Now I'm going to get back to talking about color and some color theory, terminology, and relationships. The following will be a step-by-step section about primary, secondary, and complementary colors. It's a basic introduction, especially for those of you who might never have taken a color theory class. Primary colors are generally thought of as red, yellow, and blue, and defined as a primary color cannot be created from other colors. I think of it as they just are. But stated another way, a primary color cannot be separated into another color. There's another part of the definition. All colors can be created by mixing primary colors together. But I already told you that you can't make pink, lavender, or brown from these colors. So I like the definition of primary colors as any of a group of colors from which all other colors can be obtained by mixing. But notice I put the word all in parentheses, and I will come back to that later. Another way to think of the color wheel is in a triangular relationship. And this will take us to the concept of secondary colors. Secondary colors are created when two primaries are mixed together. Primary red plus primary blue equals secondary purple. Primary red plus primary yellow equals secondary orange. Primary yellow plus primary blue equals secondary green. And here's a painted example that Ken did for me, which you're probably familiar with. Primary yellow plus primary blue equals secondary green. So these are the secondary relationships. And now that we have primaries and secondaries, I'm going to talk about complementary colors. Complementary colors are colors that are directly opposite each other. So primary red plus secondary green are complements to each other, as are primary blue and secondary orange, as is primary yellow and secondary purple. The definition continues that mixing complementary colors together results in a neutral. When primary red plus secondary green get mixed and flow towards the middle, they make a neutral that we call gray. Why does this happen? It's because the mixed color that results actually includes all of the colors in the color wheel. Green is a secondary color made up of primary blue plus primary yellow. And when mixed with primary red, you have all of the primaries and they neutralize each other. I'll just point out that if you've ever made icing or Easter eggs, and at the end your dye is just mud, that's because it's got all the colors. Blue and orange are complements. When they're mixed, they create a neutral. Orange is made from primary red plus primary yellow and mixed with primary blue becomes neutral. Yellow and purple are complements. When they're mixed, they create a neutral. Purple is made from primary red plus primary blue, and when mixed with primary yellow, you get a neutral. But there's another aspect to complementary colors that will initially sound contradictory. Mixing complements can actually zing things up. And that's because the neutral is full of color. It can be a richer gray or brown than squeezing gray out of a tube or buying gray yarn, because it's rare that for the two colors that you started with to be actually exact complements. So as my husband says, some color always leaks through and makes the complement richer. We're going to talk about color wheels again. This is my basic color wheel, but now I want to add white to it, and I'm going to add white equally to all colors on that wheel. These lighter colors from the addition of white are called tints. People often call them pastels. Technically, we're calling them tints. Here's the basic wheel again, and this time I want to add black to it, equally to all of the colors. These darker colors from the addition of black are called shades. Here's the basic wheel again, which is going to have the concept of value added to it. I'm going to place the lighter tint wheel into the middle of this basic wheel. And here's the tint wheel combined with the basic wheel. And now I'll add the darker shade wheel to the outer part of the basic wheel. So now all three color wheels have been combined into a flat plane of concentric circles showing light to dark hues. I've created a value scale with color rather than the black to white grayscale. This was really helpful for me to see where to look for some colors. Remember when I wondered where to find pink, lavender, olive, and brown? Well, pink is from mixing white into red. Lavender comes from mixing white into purple, the secondary color coming from mixing primary red and primary blue. And olive, surprisingly, is not in the green section. Olive is in the yellow section when black is added to yellow. that is so cool. I'm serious. It's like I never understood why my husband's lineup of colored pencils would have olive in the yellow section until I understood how olive was created. It's also a great little vegetable. And brown comes from adding black to orange, orange being the secondary color made when primary red plus primary yellow are mixed together. The orange and olive parts of the wheel tend to be my favorite. I use them all the time. There's something about them that just really resonates with me. At some point, I came across Munsell's theory of color, and it knocked my socks off. The concept of color theory is how various people have interpreted what they see in the world and tried to codify it. Not only are there many ways to explain the relationships of the physical existence of color, but our brains interpret color possibly differently from one another as well. And what you see may not be what I see, and color blindness is an obvious example of this. Munsell's theory of color was an important discovery for me because it explained how to locate all colors relative to one another in what turns out to be a three-dimensional landscape. All right, let me just add here. Okay. All right. Okay, so here you see Munsell's three attributes of color. There's hues, which is another word for color. He assigned 5 principal colors: red, yellow, green, blue, and purple. Sir Isaac Newton had assigned 7 colors: Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Nobody ever knows what indigo and violet is. Elementary school kids, when they have art class, they learn 6 colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. Perfect. All right. And then, so that's hue. Then value, how light or dark a color is. Black, gray, and white have no hue, so they're called neutral colors. And then there's chroma, which is also defined as saturation, how dull to vivid from a neutral color of the same value. It's a continuum of dull to vivid. This part of the page is what knocked my socks off. It's a 3-dimensional concept of locating color. There is a central core that represents value. The darkest at the bottom, the lightest is at the top. The hues, the colors, are on a flat plane color wheel, like we've been looking at. The plane is located horizontally at the equator at a mid-level of value, halfway between black and white. From that level, that equator, each hue, each color has a chroma wing that starts at the value core, at that rod in the center, and the wing moves from dull at the rod to vivid at the outermost part of the wing. And every section of that value core has a set of wings associated with it. So this image only shows the color plane at the middle of the core and its wings. Let me just make sure I know where I'm at. Okay. All right. So this is the Munsell color tree showing all the components in their 3-dimensional relationship. And I'm not going to go into why it's not like a perfect, even tree. It has to do with the physical properties of color and pigment. You can see that each value level has its own chroma wings, from dull going out to the most vivid. If you ignore the concept of chroma, which I usually do, because it's hard to work with in the real world of commercial yarn, where you have very few choices of yarn to begin with, you can make flat stacks of color wheels, an infinite number of flat wheels piled one on top of each other, from darkest shades at the bottom to the lightest tints at the top. It's infinite. And in this way, a cylinder is created showing the relationship of hue, color, value, and saturation, which is that other word for chroma. And that's all I have to tell you about color theory and color relationships. It's basic. I now can see where everything is formed. Can't always buy it, but I know where it comes from. And now it's time to introduce the concept of structure. How do you put yarns together so you can use what you've learned about color theory to create fabric? And that is the doorstep I was always left at, probably even abandoned at after sitting through the lectures about color theory. How do you actually implement color theory ideas in woven cloth? So in the next section, I'm going to share what I eventually learned, starting with what I learned about the concept of value. The pinwheel or star design needs strong contrast to make this star pattern visible. Weavers know it as color and weave effect because it's not actually a weave structure. The left here shows the structural interlacement, how the warp and the weft interlace. So you're seeing where the floats of the warp and floats of the weft are. You will only see a pattern in the cloth when the warp and the weft are different colors. So on the right, that shows the drawdown, where you see these lozenges or footballs or shuttle shapes. I go between all those words to describe the shape. In that case, I now have a black warp and the weft is all white. The structure has not changed at all. The interlacement remains the same as in the diagram on the left. Now you're seeing a pattern. But when you have two contrasting colors in both the warp and the weft, stars appear. The structural interlacement has remained absolutely the same. And that's how I always saw color and weave presented, using only two colors, one dark, the other light. About 7 to 8 years into my weaving career, I wondered, could you use more than one color for the darks and the lights? So I tried using two colors. I used red and pink instead of only red or only pink as the contrasting color alternating with black. And then I tried light blue plus white, contrasting with dark green. And then blue and purple to contrast with yellow. And so this experiment led me to my concept of yarns as fraternal twins. Two very similar colors could work together as one, standing in or substituting for the other, thereby making them equivalents. And this expands the range of color. But it only works well if the twins are the same value or similar in hue. And though I thought I knew what I was doing, I wound up with plaid because I misidentified who the fraternal twins were because the wrong pairs combined to optically blend than what I had thought. I had thought of the red and the turquoise as the twins contrasting with the dark green. But in fact, the turquoise is brighter and lighter. So here, like chroma is sort of kicking its head into things. And so the turquoise is brighter and lighter in value than both the red and the green. I thought I was only playing with the concept of value, but the concept of complementary color had come into play where red and green worked together as the twins, and they blended together versus the turquoise. So I had a great scarf, but it wasn't what I thought was going to happen. I learned a really great lesson. Here's another lesson I learned about using complementary colors. In this draft, the warp is all green, the weft is all red, and it's woven in plain weave. The end-on-end structure of plain weave produces pixelation, causing optical blending. The complementary colors, red plus green, together create a neutral. And this draft, in fact, becomes pretty gray, especially at a distance. Maybe people in the back of the room are seeing very grayed out image. But by using two ends of green, alternating with two ends of red in both the warp and the weft, You get better contrast and the draft looks less gray because there are bigger chunks of green and red that can be discerned. And when you increase the number of ends to 4 reds with 4 greens in both the warp and the weft, you get complementary zing because primary red plus secondary green have all of the hues on the color wheel, and you can see them working against each other. So comparing all 3 versions, you can now see how end-on-end plain weave produces a toned-down draft versus the bigger chunks of discrete color. And note, all of these are woven in plain weave, so you can get some color and weave effects by how you place your color in plain weave without changing the structure. Playing with complements introduced me now to the concept of quantity, how many ends you use, and scale. What distance will the fabric be viewed at? There's a big difference between looking at something down at your loom versus turning it into clothing and coming across a stage. The image you're looking at here demonstrates optical mixing. These 4 colors, red, blue, green, and yellow, are cut from the same color paper aid, the same color aid paper, but the individual colors change and look different depending on who their neighbors are and what's going on in the neighborhood. So sometimes when you're having a problem finding the right color yarn to use in a design, it could be that you're focusing on the wrong culprit. Instead, you might need to change the next door neighbor, whether it's in the warp or the weft. And this is an important point for weavers because we're always dealing with issues of optical blending and pixelation. Having learned about color and the importance of structure, how you put them together is the design stage. And this is what my desk can look like when I'm in the process of designing, although I made it neater for the image. But let me tell you, it's a mess, but it's all on my desk. In 2007, Handwoven magazine asked me if I had any tips and tricks to contribute to an article, in particular, how I store my yarn and keep track of yarn inventory. I think there's really a lot of valuable info here, especially maybe for newer weavers. And so I'm actually going to go through it. I hate when people read a PowerPoint and it's on the screen, but I am going to tell you about it. I just need, okay. All right, so I write all relevant yarn information inside my codes. I am quite maybe OCD about things like this. I'm very, very focused on organization. I write the date it was purchased, the price per pound, the number of yards per pound, and the color name and fiber info. Sometimes it's also important to make sure you know where you got it. Then I wrap a sample of each yarn on an embroidery floss card, labeled with the same yarn information, and they're put into boxes and stored by fiber and color families within each box. And as I design, I use the floss cards to see how colors work together, testing out relationships of hue and value. I don't pull the cones of yarn off the shelf until I've played with the floss cards, because otherwise it's a disaster trying to, like, you can't get in and out. And when you have a cat, not a good idea. And as an added benefit to using these floss boxes as storage is that they're portable, and they used to come shopping with me. What I did versus on the shelf and realized, oh, I did have it, or, oh, I don't have that yarn. So I never made duplicate purchases. And it's really compact, easy method. I mostly buy online now, so I know what I want. And there's very few yarns these days that are really geared towards weavers. Pet peeve. And you see the bobbins in the cigar box on the right. I'm compulsive. I label and pre-wind paper quills with yarns that I use often so I can sample quickly. And I use tencel yarn all the time. So I have all of the bobbins there and I can just grab them and go to sample, and I do keep notes. Okay. And I was thrilled when the article came out, especially since I shared the page with the very famous weaver, writer, and teacher, Sharon Alderman. I don't know how many newer weavers know of her, but if you go to the early handwoven magazines, she had this fantastic series like every month or several times a year. I just looked up to her, and just this last April, I finally met her. She's retired. I was out in Salt Lake City and was invited to dinner with her. That was really fun. So I was really excited that, I shared a page with her. Um, um, I had gotten top billing, and then it was pointed out to be by my dear sweet husband that maybe I was just her opening act. Gotta love the guy. Okay, so here's where reality kicks in. I need yarn to weave. And this actually is a picture, not in my studio, but the skirt that I'm wearing, it's not those yarns, but I was out in Washington State with a designer weaver, and this was the time period we were doing yardage. Anyway, I don't want to spend time dyeing yarn. I generally am weaving to sell, so price point is important to me. And I'd rather use that time for weaving. So I'm limited to what's available in the commercial retail yarn world. Here's my palette. I mostly use tencel yarn. It's rayon from wood pulp. I'm often educating the public that rayon is a process, not a plant, that it's considered regenerated cellulose, and that it's not one of the synthetic on sisters, nylon and orlon. The reason I use tencel is because it comes in a relatively large range of colors, in a fine enough grist. It has a nice hand. It's drapable and has great sheen and produces iridescence for me. So here's the entire palette of tencel lined up in the color order. The color wheel now has been put into a linear relationship. And note, there's only one yellow, and it pops out like the diva I said it could be. And this is my yarn palette. It's a finite number of colors at my disposal, and that's it. My A2 Tencel yarn palette. And since I like to place all of my color in the warp and just use one shuttle for weft, I often end up using the very same gradations and sequences. So here I've arranged the cards in concentric circles according to value, from the darkest on the inside to the lightest on the outside. And you can immediately see how very few pale colors there are. And actually that lavender on the right side and the light pink, and then somewhere there was a light blue. Webb's got rid of them because you couldn't use them. It was only like 3 pale colors. This was another attempt to group the cards according to their value, taking the hues and placing them together in 3 groups from lightest to darkest. And then I scanned them in black and white to check their relative value. And again, it's quite apparent that there are very few pale color yarns. Most colors seem to fall in the mid-range, and the darks are very similar in hue. I want to mention that scanning on your printer or using the grayscale from your camera is helpful, but it is not 100% accurate. Your own eye will often be a better judge of relative relationships. There are definitely discrepancies when it comes to the camera or printer's ability to read color or value accurately. In any case, all this is just information. Better be on the other page. It's all information, and it still needs to be implemented, put together and turned into fabric. And I just mentioned earlier that I like to place all of my color in the warp. That's so I can weave with one shuttle with only one weft color and get into the rhythm of weaving once I learn my treadling. The joy of weaving is amazing. And if you're constantly going line by line, you need to learn your pattern. Sometimes it's hard, and sometimes your computer can do it for you. Dobby looms are great, but you really need to learn it. Okay. This is the color aid paper palette for my workshop. There must be 50 ways to weave your color. The next group of images will show you how I repeatedly use this colorway. These are the tencel yarns that I chose to approximate that color palette. I set them up in rainbow order of hues to get an idea of how well they work together and will grade into each other. And I pulled out the two colors that didn't quite blend in the sequence, the blue being very dark and the lemongrass being very light and bright. Now you see a general wrapping that I did, trying to do a smooth gradation of these colors. It's a linear sequence that's asymmetric because it goes from left to right, doesn't repeat, just like the floss card lineup on top. Notice in that wrapping on the white paper that between any two tencel colors, I use what's called end-on-end color blending, alternating one end of each of the two colors to attempt a smooth gradation from one color to the next. The bottom wrapping is the actual sequence of warp colors for a huck lace lattice design. I did bring this scarf with me. There's no room on the table. Afterwards, I'll put it up on the chairs because it's really a beautiful scarf. Okay. It turns out that the answer to my question from way earlier in my weaving life about how to know how many ends to use when doing a wrapping is that you have to match your color sequence to the weave structure. In this case, the huck lace variation that I'm going to show you is a 5-end pattern. So the color bands will correspond to increments of 5 threads. So this is the woven lattice scarf. It is a variation of huck lace. The fringe shows the yarn wrapping color order from that rust color to the light blues, and includes the lemongrass, which is barely visible. It's in the vertical stripes at either side. There's a pattern of like 4 lines, and that's just where I put it. I was toning it down. The blue was used as weft to tie everything together. So here's a bigger view of the scarf. The March-April 2005 Handwoven magazine article with directions for weaving it, the lattice scarf, my scarf creates a hand-dyed effect, and we were supposed to use for this color forecast series I'll talk about in a little while, we're supposed to use off-the-shelf available yarn. And Madeline Vanderhoot called me and said, "So you dyed your warp?" And it was like, "No, Madeline, I followed the rules and I used off-the-shelf tencel." And so it created this dyed effect, whereas Tracy's jacket is dyed to match the palette, and they used it, and I was very miffed. I learned you break the rules all the time when you're dealing with magazine stuff. They'll use it for whatever reason, whether it's according to what they said they wanted or not. Here's another example using the same yarns with the general linear sequence as a yarn wrapping, this time with the new yarn wrapping for what will be a twill design. It's the same color palette, but it sure looks different with all of that lemongrass striping through. Here's the woven scarf, and I do have it with me. You get to see it later. But where is the bright lemongrass that was so dominant in that wrapping? It's not visible in the fabric, but you can see it in the fringe. And when you flip the scarf over, you see it's on the reverse side. So this is a 3-1-1-3 twill, meaning that one side of the scarf is warp dominant. That was the side that I just showed you. The majority of the warp colors was visible as warp. And the other side, this side that you're seeing here, is weft dominant, where the blue weft is covering those bright colors that were warp dominant on the other side and lets the warp show in the thin lemongrass stripe. So it is the reverse where you see that lemongrass. For newer weavers, this type of twill can create a collapse weave structure, which will pleat or corrugate when washed and left unironed. And the draft and directions are in the November-December 2009 Handwoven article, All You Do Is Spritz, because Madeline had called me and said, "You use differential shrinkage." And I said, "No, Madeline, it's all, tencel and silk, silk in the weft." And I said, if you have video, I can show you in real time. I'll spritz it for you in real time. It will collapse. And she said no. And then the article came out, and it's all you do is spritz. Here's the fabric. It's a self-pleating scarf with light value weft rather than dark blue. I do want to say that I have a page with my resources and references for my color classes. I will give it to Gail or whoever has it, and the information can be taken either as a PDF for your guild website, as long as my name stays on it. But it will have the specific issues if you want to see, the structure.
Open to a 5-minute break.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Okay, that's wonderful. I will take a 5-minute break for Zoom people if you didn't hear. And yet again, here's the yarn palette shown on floss cards, the basic linear color sequence. And then here are two versions of how to do a smooth gradation of color in a wrapping. Note that the color sequence is linear and asymmetric, going from rusty brown to blue, but the striping pattern, the number of ends in each band, is bilaterally symmetric. That means it's mirror image. And I want to mention that I really do have a predilection for working with colors that blend into each other, but I rarely get a truly smooth flow from one to the next because commercial yarns have a limited number of colors to choose from. And you can see in the top yarn wrapping that the color transitions, that's the topmost on the white paper, they're not necessarily smooth. So one of my strategies is to use the Fibonacci series to slowly move from one color to the next. So it starts happening in the second yarn wrapping, how there's more color coming through the yellow. I'm trying to just smooth out that gradation. I think I missed something, but when I show you this picture of an elephant behind bars of his cage, you know what, I'm going to go back for a minute, make sure I tell you something. Okay. I think here. So the bottom wrapping here is the actual sequence for the Huck Lace lattice design. And maybe that's not it. Okay. Anyway, we'll go to the elephant. So going back for a second, I do use these dark lines to actually mark where my color changes, which seems a little weird if I want it to be smooth, but I'm marking where the color changes. So when I show you this picture of an elephant behind the bars of his cage, your brain has learned that it is a complete elephant. It's not sections or slices behind the bars like this. This took me forever to make this image. So like the elephant behind bars, I use the suspension of disbelief to trick your eye into thinking that there's a completely smooth color progression that's going on behind those dark warp stripes. And here's the woven cloth from that color progression. When Lynn's binder went through with of the 50 Ways class, there was a sample of a part of this weave structure. So this is what that wrapping ended up doing. It's an 8-shaft advancing twill design. I call it Ruby's Reverberations. The threading pattern is more or less bilaterally symmetric, so it looks like it's reverberating, evenly, which twills don't exactly do, but your eye thinks it is. And the striping pattern is mirror image, it's like an overlay over the colors, but the color sequence is linear. And I like to play with those dichotomies. And here's the scarf with when you fold it so that the warm pink selvage edge can be near your neck, or flip it so that the cool blue greens are at the neck. And I think of it as a 2-for-1 scarf. And of course, the scarves are reversible, but I sell. And so I'm always coming up with ways to convince, someone who's going to spend a lot of money that they're really getting a 2-for-1 special with one scarf. Here, this is an example of the same reverberations pattern on the loom with a different warp, and this time the colors are actually in a symmetric mirror image sequence. And so this is where I am about to pause. You might be wondering how I got to this point, from this point when I was a confused new weaver, and we will take a break. Okay. Okay, so how did I get from this point when I was a confused new weaver? I was not in this image. I'm an old weaver. I'm past being confused, but I didn't have a young image of me like that. All right, so the answer is that the real beginning of my learning curve about how to work with color goes back to January 2000, 25 years ago, although I'd been weaving since 1987, when I started weaving an advancing twill design, which I call circles and feathers. I had taken a Bonnie Inouye class about advancing twill, and that was like so mind-blowing. The advancing twill is shown in this collection of rolled scarves. They look like they're all like one warp color, but actually they have multicolors in it. It's just basic image. It turned out to be a 3-year case study of one weave structure that led to doing 25 warps of the very same structure, but in different colorways, all tied on to each other, one after another. And I have all 25 warps here, which you've already started looking through, which is fine. This is the explanation of it. My first exploration began with what I thought at the time was a daring choice of 2 colors in the warp. But when I look back on it now, I can barely tell that there's any difference between the 2 colors. And I had limited number of weft options at that point. It was followed by another warp where I thought I was being even bolder, but again, it's really difficult to discern that there are 2 colors in the warp. And I realized later on that I was replicating the color of my red hair at the time, although you would never know it now. That's really disappointing that white-haired people, you don't know what they used to have color-wise. It's very different than being salt and pepper or whatever. You can see the progression, but white is like, who were you in your youth? Then I decided to explore complementary colors, 2 very closely related hues. This was called azalea pink and putty green. The colors weren't perfect complements, and I agonized over that for quite a while before finally jumping into winding the warp. And I've got to say that procrastination due to indecision is a bear, and that I suffer greatly from it, because just hanging out, waiting for the answer to come, it doesn't come unless you do something more to check it out. So like weaving it is the answer in this case. So this view of the fabric shows the neutral grade toned down effect that I was hoping for by using complementary colors. I was really surprised, though, by how pink the reverse side was until I realized that the side that you're seeing on the right, was warp dominant, whereas the other side was a bit more weft dominant because the weft I was using was a dull blue. So twill can give you a lot of variation based on where the floats are and who's showing on the surface, whether you're weft or warp. The next question I asked was, does the sequence of 4 colors in the same hue family matter? Are there different results if you line them up in a linear pattern, A, B, C, D, and repeat that, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, or mirroring them, A, B, C, D, C, B, A, B, C, D, back and forth, so you get this pivoting? Or just using them in a random fashion? And I found out that the answer is, yeah, it does make a difference, but it often doesn't matter. It depends on the specific design, where your floats show up and nest together, and how well the colors blend with each other. In other words, how close in value and hue they are to each other. And I also saw that using 4 yarns in the same hue family made for a much richer red scarf than just using 1 red. Next, I wondered whether I could use a different yellow in the border than in the central feathers. So this is called circles and feathers. The border has a circle design. The center has a kind of feather pattern. And the borders are a little more greenish than the melon yellows in the center. And I found that yet again, as I had expanded my range of colors, I had a richer textile. After the yellows, I wanted to work with the blue, green, teal yarns sitting on the shelf. These are not tencel yarns. These are the days when Webs had mill ends called 6-ply rayon that were so phenomenal. They were like the colors of DMC embroidery floss, and they were unlimited. And the price was great, and had a stock room filled with it and more cartons in the back. Well, it was. Those days are gone when mill ends, and weaving, spinning, all the dyeing stuff went offshore, and we don't really get them anymore. So after the yellows, I wanted to work with these blue greens, and I was trying out the fraternal sibling concept, and there are different color combinations in the central feather sections. And I used a very different color in the vein of the center of those feathers. So you can kind of see it. It didn't look like much in the sample. And I just ended up committing to trying the black weft because everybody wanted a black scarf or, black weft. So we used to call, in Vermont at the farmer's market, we used to call the people from Boston or New York, the Pibs, people in black. You could spot them a mile away walking their fancy dogs from their second homes or whatever. But, they were the ones buying, so it's like I loved my Pibs. So it totally, and I'm a New Yorker, so like I got it, it's cool. That totally surprised me when I saw that I had created snakeskin there, because here you can actually see that vein, and it only appeared in the center of those feathers. And it was just like, wow, this is so cool. By the time I was trying to use my melon and poppy colors, I bravely tried placing very different colors in the border circles section than the ones in the feathers section, and was bolder in my color choices in the fraternal sibling department in that feather section. And at this point, I got a phone call inviting me to weave samples for Handwoven Magazine's new Color Forecast series, with the deadline less than 3 weeks away. They emailed me the 4 palettes that would represent the upcoming season's trends in color using Color Aid paper numbers. This is what a small box of Color Aid paper looks like. It contains the full set of 314 colors as 2-inch by 3-inch rectangles. Don't ever drop this box, because it's a nightmare to return them to the original color sequence, which is here. And this is the booklet that comes inside. It is 2 inches by 3 inches with a lot of information, and how the colors are labeled and what the terms mean and how they're arranged. So that red border that I have around the top left, that red box is 2 inches by 3 inches. And in order to be able to read it, I blew it up to fit on an 8.5 by 11-inch piece of paper. I would never bother ever again. If I dropped the paper, I wouldn't try and get, the squares, I wouldn't bother putting them in order. So I pulled out the correct Color Aid rectangles from the box, grouped them together into the 4 palette choices. I grabbed my floss boxes to see if I had yarns to match any of the palettes. I had no time to order anything. My 2 looms were literally tied up with 20 to 25 yards of yarn in specific patterns. So I was going to have to use one of the 2 for this challenge. One was the circles and feathers design. The other was the lattice pattern I had shown you that earlier. I ended up choosing this acid hues palette. That's not what they called it, but that's what it was. Since I had most of the colors already on hand in one form or another, but also because it worked well with the concepts I'd already figured out when playing with color in this design. Fraternal siblings, reds and pinks, could substitute for each other in the center feather section. The green could be used as the feather's vein, zinging things up, since red and green are complements, which left the darkest color and the lightest color of the palette, and whichever I chose would be used for the border, and the other would be used as weft. I wove a sampler trying to match the colors as perfectly as possible, and I didn't really get a perfect match. And the day before I absolutely had to mail it off, I decided to weave a scarf using a weft that definitely wasn't anywhere near a match to the darkest yarn. Here's the hand-woven article with a photo of a small section of the scarf. They didn't use the sample, they photographed the scarf. My dream of fame and fortune was laughable because I had earned $50. I spent $35 on the color aid paper, $25 on overnight shipping, not to mention the cost of the yarn, and the famous photographer, Joe Coca, photographed the scarf with what looked to me like a treadling error dead center when I saw the magazine, but was in fact a wrinkle caused by folding it when I mailed it. And so the stylist didn't move it so that they had an uncreased area or steamed it. God forbid they should have steamed my fabric. Okay, after this first experience designing with the concept of matching a color palette, I kept getting more adventurous with my circles and feather warps and realized that I could in fact design by just doing yarn wrappings because I thoroughly understood the circles and feathers structure. I could check out the basic color relationships proportionally without having to wind out the entire 230 thread by thread color sequence. And so I just would wind a 25-yard warp based on one of these yarn wrappings that I thought would look good because I knew after sampling a dozen colors, I would get at least one nice one, if not some beauties. When Ken expressed curiosity about how much yarn I had used in this 3-year project, I did the math calculations for him, and I basically had done a 3-year project doing 25 warps. I had made something like 22 plus dozen scarves. I had made 267 scarves. I think I sold most of them. There were 230 ends, and each warp was about 25 yards. I had used 126,500 yards of 6-ply rayon, equaling 50 pounds of yarn, and that was 72 miles. So don't let anyone ever say you can't bust your stash. Nevertheless, I still have more of this yarn. Mostly it's natural color. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's like if you like to weave, you know, what difference does it make if you're doing the same structure over and over again? You know what the heck's going on. Your body sure knows when you're about to make a mistake because it stops you. What's going on here? Because it knows the zen of your habits. Anyway, working on the swatch team for Handwoven Magazine's Color Forecast series ultimately pushed me into focusing on how to use optical blending to the utmost and no longer attempt an exact match for any given color swatch that they gave me. And by 2005, I dared to share what I had learned by applying to the Association of Northwest Weaving Guild conference to teach a workshop. With a workshop I had never taught, I just invented it, created on color that I called There Must Be 50 Ways to Weave Your Color. And I came up with the Lost in Translation lecture because I figured, well, maybe they'd give me the gig if I had a workshop and a lecture because, you know, they're schlepping me out from Vermont. And, you know, and in July of that year, I got the note saying, we've selected you. And I was like, yay. Oh, no, now I have to actually design the class, which was pretty crazy. I want to tell you a little bit more about when I was doing samples for the Color Forecast series. I thought it was pragmatic to offer 4-shaft woven samples as often as possible to reach the magazine's audience of hobby weavers, which would also increase the likelihood that I get published. And I pulled out this sample of mine, which had previously been relegated to my forget about this weave, it's boring, because I was a snobbish 8-shaft weaver, and then I became determined to figure out how to put color in this 4-shaft Bumbarette weave. This is a sampler I did for the Forecast series. And as most samplers go, it looks chaotic. You don't want to go home and say, hey, honey, I just made this, because it looks like, what the heck is going on there? But I had been very specific in how I set it up to gather the most information about color placement. Here's the handwoven article with a small section of the sample. It's not what I thought was the most interesting portion. And for the record, I'd like you to know that the fabric for this vest does not exist. It was never woven. The vest was never sewn. It was just an article about how it could be done, which I thought was kind of ridiculous for a weaving magazine when they could have explored some of the multiple possibilities of Bumbarette, which I've discovered to be pretty extensive. And here's the proof that I succeeded in introducing color into Bumbarette from yarn wrapping to fabric, which I used for the cover of the booklet for the Bumbarette class I finally designed, called The Weaver's Recipe for 4-Shaft Ribs and Chicken Feet, when I realized how amazing this 4-shaft weave structure is. And in case you can't read the fine print on the cover, this is an animal-friendly workshop. Bumbarette is a weave structure that produces textural ribs, not spare ribs, and chevrons like chicken feet. So if you're going to teach, you may as well have fun. And finally, here are the Bumbarette yarn wrappings for that workshop. This shows, these are my bum wraps. This shows the front of the wrappings and the reverse side, which made Ken happy because I learned how to create archival wrappings and no longer use tape. And this might seem irrelevant on some levels, but since Greenland has been in the news, it seems timely to share this with you. For 2 weeks in June 2017, I traveled with Ken to Greenland at the start of an artist residency he was going to be doing there. We took a 3-day ferry trip up the west coast of Greenland from Nuuk, the capital, to Ilulissat, which is further up on the west coast of Greenland. What you're seeing are floating icebergs that have calved off a massive glacier. I was preparing to teach a color workshop when I returned called Project Colorway for weavers who would rather dye, D-I-E, than dye, D-Y-E, and was working on how to present new color ideas. I got to tell you, if you don't come up with a catchy title, people just like don't even read what you're offering. So I work hard at it. One of the things I worked on while on that ferry trip was to arrange the floss cards. These are tencel, all the tencel colors, in pairs of complementary colors. And then I did a yarn wrapping with each of the 2 complementary colors, but between them, I did an end-on-end alternation to create what I hoped would be a neutral blend because they were complements. And it turns out that these wrappings are really an incredible resource for my own work now. And this is the Project Colorway class in action at MAFA 2017 in Millersville, Pennsylvania. I gave each group the full line of tencel yarns. I wound them on bobbins, 3 stations, 41 colors each, full bobbins. I prepped for classes. I asked them to come up with a way to somehow match those bobbins to specific color aid papers. And this exercise trains the eye to see hue, color, and how to break apart color into its component parts in order to blend the yarns to create a yarn color that might not exist on the shelf, but gets optically created when it's part of a neighborhood, when you're using them end on end. So if you can break a color apart, you can use those 2 colors that dyers would say needed to be put together in a vat to make that color. If you use those 2 colors separately, your eye will end up seeing them as the color you need, which might not happen in the 41 colors that exist. And kind of crazy, but I offered to troubleshoot their problematic warps that they would bring in. These warps were usually created during a guild's dye day when they had no specific idea of a project that they were going to use these for. And they were always left unsure of how to use the day's creations. And so like they brought them to me to tell them how to use them. Okay, but we came up with ideas. I mean, Project Runway was like the best show in my life for, helping me figure out design, like how to work with problems. Here we are back in Vermont. I want to share a few details about my studio space and my warping techniques. My studio is on the second floor of my house with a very leaky roof on the right side. In Vermont, we have ice dams when the snow builds up and stays there for 3 months and it just leaks through your roof. This is where I wind my warps on a vertically hung set of warping boards. I'm very old school. I don't use a warping reel of any sort. I do it manually, but it's vertical. The two boards are next to each other, but there's a space between them, and I can wind up to 25 yards. If I didn't have a window on the left or my roof projection on the right, I could squeeze more yardage, but I can't. It's much easier to go up and down, resting your arm with gravity, than moving back and forth from side to side on these warping boards, which is the traditional way that people are taught. Your arm gets tired. You get to the bottom, go, yeah, good. I will give credit to Leslie Voyers back in when I first learned to weave. She was the director of Harrisville Designs, and she always taught this. Anyway, it's really helpful. I tie on to existing warps. So this is the front of the loom. My new pink and yellow warp is being tied on onto the end of the last warp, which is that turquoisey and green yellow that's coming through the reed. Both warps have leaf sticks in them to preserve the thread by thread color, and then I tie thread by thread to each other and then beam as though it's front to back. And threading's perfect, the spacing on the reed is perfect, my tension is perfect. Now this is the view at the back of the loom looking towards the front. This is showing the tied-on knots at the back as they have reached the back of the heddles. So what you're seeing in the middle of the image is that turquoise yellowish warp that I had tied onto on the front, which was coming through the reed. And that's all that had been left of that warp. I didn't make it go through the heddles because you get terrible tension as all those knots come through. So that's all that was left. And what you're seeing at the bottom of the slide with that melon and teal green was the previous warp that I had woven on and that was coming off the back beam. And that's how I tied on all of these 25 samples, one after the other. And I have a bag there that if I'm brave enough, I'll take out and shows the sequence of 25 thrums tied onto each other. Okay, some final thoughts. My twisted fringe here shows you that I put all of my color in the warp. I treadle with only one weft color. And keep in mind that weaving is about pixelation, which causes optical blending. When you know your weave structure, you can utilize basic ideas about color theory, especially the roles that value and complementary colors play, for where to place your colors to maximize your palette beyond what's on the yarn shelf. People often ask me what my inspirations are for designing my fabrics. The answer is that though I generally don't attempt to weave fabric to match paintings, photos, or even color palettes, it turns out that my environment and my surroundings are innately a part of me, and I unconsciously absorb them and reproduce them. This scarf, it's a circles and feathers scarf, was woven in the summer. But when we went to photograph it in the autumn for a show card, I realized that our gorgeous beech tree had definitely had an impact on me. These two circles and feather scarves were also woven in the summer and are proof that I have clearly internalized Vermont's autumn foliage landscapes. Under the Sea came outside for her photo shoot, and I realized I had unintentionally matched my house. Yep. 12 yards of samples and scarf yardage that were washed and hanging on the line to dry in late spring one year became the inspirations for a winter show card announcement. While he was alive, Zappa was always hanging out at my feet. So I draped the latest scarf on him and knew he'd stayed still for a photo shoot, and then realized the scarf and the rug matched. And then one day, a circles and feathers scarf digitally merged with an oil pastel landscape of Ken's and became a full digital collaboration of ours. My living room has become the showroom gallery year-round for both Ken's and my work, ready for open studios, that's him knitting, and easy for viewing my inventory without anyone having to climb the stairs to my upstairs studio. Weaving is dead center important to me, just as Winslow Homer's red scarf is dead center important in his painting, The Lifeline. For over 30 years, I've been volunteering in my local elementary school as an unpaid artist in residence, going in every week, hopefully creating new generations of weaving enthusiasts who grow up to believe in themselves as artists, creators, and makers. My oldest son, who's 41, is in this third grade picture. Although I grapple with anxiety while preparing to teach a workshop, present a lecture, or getting ready for a craft show, the beasts do get tamed, and the worst of which is almost always indecision, which gives me indigestion. They're all named warp, weft, color, and I don't know how easily it's readable. And the show goes on even when the garish carpet tries to upstage my weavings. We all need to be surrounded by support teams. I've got Ken, my circus ringleader, and a wonderful family of unpaid models who allow me numerous opportunities to show off my work while they stay warm and stylish, wrapped in my scarves and blankets that double as my constant woven hugs. This is my little 10-month-old who lives in Fort Greene, especially when under the weather. From the time they were toddlers, my kids heard the music of the loom, and as young adults created a rap music video for me, Ma is a Weaver. Get your loom going. And I'm going to try and see if it plays now. I don't know if it'll do it. So let's see.
Oh, I hear music.
Okay, let me see if.
There it is.
Okay, it takes a while for it to come up, and it's under 3 minutes. It's an old one. Oh, I'm not sure.
Oh, here.
Oh, here, okay.
There's no audio.
It takes a lot of God. Comes from a farm. Don't say mom, but then they said it to my mama for the trail ever at it. So big it's those trails go up and down. Down. Oh, you're my. Get your Lucy bones. Boom, boom. Got the wolf and the rat. SCARF. mother is a weaver. That's not the weave. It's through the sea. But mom, what's the hardest? And the baby is Robin, but the world out weaving. It might be deceiving. For me, it's Ruby. Ruby, child, Ruby. 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 Ruby, child, Ruby. 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 Ruby, child, Ruby. Ruby. Child, Ruby.
I hope you've all gotten your fill of color today and will go home and get your loom going. Boom, boom. Thank you. It's on my website, the URL. It's hard to find if you just Google it. Yeah, one of my favorite parts is when Woody rhymed heddle and they send it to my mama for her treadle and her heddle, which will make it so the thread'll go up and down. It was just, they did it at 3 a.m. before I was sleeping. They came in to go to an adult of ours, a friend of ours who they knew as kids, and they asked me a whole bunch of questions, and then I went to bed, and they were downstairs, and they went to the bathroom to be quiet. And
Are
that's
you asking a question?
I am, and there's lots of like the sample of the circles and feathers and finished scarves, some of which we're seeing, some not. And I am wearing, nobody on Zoom, this skirt was woven, I wove the fabric, but a designer, I had to show them. I'm not lifting my skirt up for Zoom. Sorry, I am wearing leggings, but no. In 2010, I had been invited as one of 6 people in 3 teams. So they made pairs of a weaver and a pattern designer for Convergence second design challenge, where they gave us yarns for the Albuquerque Southwest color. It was very loosey-goosey, and I got paired with Linda Kubik, who is a weaver designer in Ritzville, Washington State, Eastern Washington, about an hour south of Spokane. And so we had 2 years to work on it. Of course, we procrastinated a lot, but she designed the skirt. There's a jacket that goes with it, and there's some 3-dimensional textural vest that goes on top, but I don't sew. Yes, questions?
What's the loom that you do your sample?
Okay, so the question, yes, I remembered. I think that, but I didn't see it. I just have been doing this long enough that kind of know. Okay, so the question is, what loom do I weave on? And most of my samples, these samples were woven on my 8-shaft Harrisville loom that I bought in 1987. It has gone through metal fatigue. It had a lot of old style stuff, but yeah, I've replaced some of it. I still need to figure out stuff about it everyone who owns a Harrisville loom has a love-hate relationship with it. It just is. So I guess my love exceeds my hate, but I also have a 12-shaft AVL 40-inch loom. So my Harrisville loom is 22 inches. It's no longer portable because we put dowels on the side and screwed them in so that I can rest my lee sticks when I'm tying on in the front, rather than having to always insert like angel sticks through to the back so that you can rest lee sticks when you're bringing a new warp and tying to the old one. More questions? Yes.
Somebody wants to know if your Bum Hooray booklet is available anywhere, or do you have to take the class?
Take the class. I don't like the idea of publishing a monograph of any sort. It's a whole bunch of work, and I would much prefer to really give the information directly, because then I have lots of samples, so I don't. All my workshops are a lot of fun, and I really like doing them as 3 days, because I think that people need to hear what they're going to be doing and give, information about the topic. and then go to their looms and weave the structure that I have provided them with. I wind all the warps for people. I came up with this in 2005. And when I went out to NYGH to teach There Must Be 50 Ways for the first time, and I walked in, I was like, this was new. I hadn't gone to many conferences before. And I walked in there after a very long Vermont to Seattle trip and then down to wherever it was, Tacoma. And I walked in and I just said, "Hi, I'm Ruby Wesley. I'm one of the instructors." And they went, "Ruby Wesley?" And I went, it turned out that nobody had ever pre-sent wound warps with so much color and the way it was sent. And it was like, that made me feel really great. So, yeah, I then have people weave, and then at the end we synthesize everything, because I think the only way you learn through listening and doing, muscle memory, and then synthesizing. So that's why I like doing workshops more than lectures. But I like this. I like doing this lecture. So it was fun to make it. Long answer.
I took my first workshop with you, but almost the workshop started before the workshop, because when you got that warp, she asks you questions about what kind of loom you have, whether you're front to back or back to fronter, and that work you get will be so incredible. And I kind of the way that I wind warps were influenced by getting that warp and working with it and having it so well prepared.
I think it might have been 2010 that I think that was Jockey Hollow that, yeah, 15 years ago. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you obviously have seen that I'm sort of compulsive, but it's really important to me that people understand. And I think that just because you read something that's written down that somebody thinks is clear doesn't mean that your brain is going to understand it. And so I find it really important to be verbose. The New York in me is like, you talk a lot, but my husband at one point said, as kind of a joke, in the days before Twitter, Ruby doesn't send postcards, meaning that like when there's an opportunity, I explain it all. I don't write, I don't send short information, because I want to make sure that everybody kind of gets it. And I've been teaching the 50 Ways class since 2005. So that's 20 years of teaching it. I have expanded how I teach it, although the samples remain the same. I do not want to do another colorway because it's too much work, and I'm too old now to try and get a new lease on it to get repeat people. Although occasionally people have taken it twice. You hear different things, but it's really important for me to get the information into your brains the way you digest information. And so, some of you have to read something. You don't want to listen to me. Some people only want to see it visually, and other people only want to do it. It's like the words, the pictures don't mean anything. So for me, putting it all together and putting that workshop together the first time to wind a warp for someone, it was like, how do I do it? I usually would do front to back. I didn't know what other people did. So I asked questions, but over the years, I've gotten more explicit. So I send out a list. Lynn has been like one of the more recent people taking the workshop. I send out asking, like, do you use a rattle? Like, I don't use the term, do you do back to front or front to back warping? Because for every person who tells me they wind front to back, they're actually technically doing it back to front, because it's a conundrum why it's called that way. So you have to understand your terms. So when I send out the information, I say, how do you warp your loom? Here's a schematic of the front of the loom, the back of the loom. Here's the castle. Where do you put your cross? Do you use a rattle? Where do you put your rattle cross? Over the years, I found people have no terminology for rattle stuff. They go, my counting cross, my bouts. and it's like I just keep expanding it schematically. And there's basically only 5 ways to get your warp on the loom. Doesn't matter whether it's a warping reel or whatever. It's like when you go to the loom, where do the threads go? What do you do first? Is it onto the back? Is it onto the front? And that sort of stuff. So for Sally, that when I sent it out, that was an eye opener that there's different ways of doing it. Any way you get your warp on the loom is fine with me. I don't care. But if I'm winding a warp for you, tell me how you do it. And new people in particular, have learned one way, and so they learn a lot from my classes. Sorry.
How many tie-ons can you do before you have to put on a totally new warp on the back beam?
Well, it depends on what your thread thickness is.
Repeat the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. How many, somebody asked, how many tie-ons can you do before you have to like abandon it and start a new warp with fresh threading and whatever. For me, I probably only had about 17 of the warps that got tied on, because initially my first few warps had, I cut them off. After like I did, I don't know, 5 of them, I thought, oh, I've said everything I need to say. And then 2 years later, I came back to it and went, whoa, there's color in my life that has to come into this. So the shorter answer is it really depends on the thickness of the yarn, what size loom you have, and how you protect the yarns as they're going on the back beam. Like if you're using corrugated cardboard, which in the old days was the way you protected the warp, that builds up pretty fast. And so, I can't say specifically. And if you're using heavy yarn, like if you're doing blankets or something or rugs, it depends. That's always the answer. It depends.
Any other questions?
I have one more online.
Okay.
What do you have to say about colors you choose and different fibers? For example, if you choose a color in linen I find it doesn't intuitively work in wool. In your experience, what advice do you have to say about that?
About translating color from one. Okay, so the question is basically translating color from one fiber to another. And if you liked it in linen, it doesn't necessarily translate well when you're using wool or tencel. It is a problem because you don't have an infinite number of choices in the retail world. One case in particular that affected me was at one point, I thought I was going to be teaching for John C. Campbell. And I thought, well, I will now get a thicker yarn. I'll do Webb's 5/2 bamboo in addition to the 8/2 tencel. And while they don't have as many colors in their 5/2 bamboo, I thought like this might be a better yarn to use. And so based on what I saw online, I ordered like lemongrass of bamboo, and I already had lemongrass. And anyway, the colors do not match up at all. Bamboo clearly doesn't take dye the same way as tencel, even though they're both cellulose rayons. And presumably when they choose the term lemongrass to describe a color, they're using the same dye base, but somehow it is so different. So the reality is you just have to go from what you've already done in your linen, and linen doesn't have a large number of colors, or doesn't take dye really deeply. If you're translating to something else, then essentially you have to play with the colors that you think are going to match and maybe work with a yarn wrapping to see how it corresponds. Sample.
Experiment, like you said.
Right,
Research.
right. All right, I kept you a long time, but I said I would speak for a long time. I have to earn my money here, so,
I'm gonna, well, thank you, Ruby.
Oh,
That
you're
was a
welcome.
really
Thank
good
you.
and inspiring.